Okay, so here we are for another poetry talk, and today's is going to be on the poet Robert Frost, who was a 20th century poet, and I would say he was you might call him a celebrity poet, because he was, not many poets have that status of kind of like you think, pop star slash film star, a celebrity, right? Poets don't often get that status, certainly in American and in Western literature in the 20th and 21st century. It's hard to find someone you're like, oh, that person is a celebrity, right? Uh, but Frost was one of those. And why so? I think one of the main reasons is because his poetry, you can understand his poems on multiple levels. It's whether you are new to poetry and you don't like to plumb the depths, you kind of read what's on the surface there, or you've read a lot of poetry and you like to delve deep into it. Wherever you come from to Frost's poems, you can take something away, okay? And so that definitely is true of the poem that we're going to look at today by Robert Frost, who again was kind of like an every man's or every woman's, every person's, if you want to modify the term, and every person's poet. A celebrity poet. But let's look into this. His poem, "The Path Not Taken." And I'm tempted to say that this is a poem that a great many people have read and love, but often misinterpret. But I want to be careful with that phrase, misinterpret, because again, as I just said, Frost is one of these guys. It's not so much that people get the poem wrong, that they misinterpret it, as it is maybe that the poem can be interpreted on multiple levels. You can pick from the top, from the surface, the shallower in the shallows, or you can go much deeper with it. So let's look at this one. Let me pull up the link here, which again is at the top there. "The road not taken. Two roads diverged in the yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler. Long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, and just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trod in black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet, knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference." All right, so this is maybe Frost's most recognized poem. People love to quote it, and we'll get into that some. But let's look at it, okay? Remember the title, "The Road Not Taken." That's important. Some people just randomly sketch off titles. I don't think Frost did that. But let's look through this poem some. So this person is walking through the woods, right? And they see two different roads, two different ways that they can go ahead of them. And it's, they're like, I wish I could have gone both ways, but I was just one person, so I had to pick. And I looked down one for a long time, one road, one route, and I was like, oh, that looks so nice, And the two roads, think two trails, right? He says roads, but think two trails, two paths in the woods, right? And he looked down one path as far as he could to where it like bent around a curve, and he couldn't see it anymore where it was going. And then he decided to take the other trail, the other path, as just as lovely, and he was like, and perhaps it had a better claim. Perhaps there was a better reason to follow the other path that I picked. Why? Why was it maybe better? Well, because it was grassy. There was lots of grass there. It wanted wear. In other words, maybe not as many people had walked down that path, so there was more grass growing up, And so maybe it just looked like not as many people had gone that way, so it might be more adventurous or more interesting, right? Though, which is kind of the American ideal, right? A lot of people raise their kids up saying, be different, be unique, right? Go your own way. So he's like, yeah, that second stanza, he's like, I picked the other path because it seemed like it was grassier, less people had gone that way. Though, and that though there, fourth line, second stanza is like a but. But, as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same. In other words, the reader's like, I know I just said that one looked like less people had walked down it, but really, they were both warned about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. He was like, actually, both trails had an equal amount of fallen leaves on them that looked like nobody had stepped on those leaves. Because if you've ever been on a trail where there's a bunch of fallen leaves and a bunch of people have gone that way, the leaves are kind of mushed into the ground, right? This black mush of leaves. But he's like, really? In actuality, both trails looked like they had an equal amount of leaves that nobody had stepped on. And he's like, so really, they were pretty much equal, And he says, oh, I kept the first for another day. He's like, I just, really, I would have liked to have taken both, but I kept the first trail, the one I looked at first, for another day. Yet, knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. He's like, even though I was like, I'll take that trail another day, knowing how life goes, how way leads on to way, if you make one choice, you usually don't get to go back and make the other choice, right? It's just the way that life goes. You make one choice and you end up with two other choices, and you choose one of those and you end up with two more choices. But the chances of coming back to that original decision and getting to take the other one, not likely, right? I doubted if I should ever come back to the place where I chose between those two trails. And you notice all of this is in past tense. The first three stanzas are in past tense. He's talking about something that happened in the past, where he was at this fork. And you can read it two ways. You can read it as literally a dude in the woods, or you can read it metaphorically, where he's talking about life and a choice that he made, right? Okay. And then the fourth stanza, he says, I shall be telling this with a sigh. So the first three stanzas are past tense. The fourth stanza is present tense, but looking forward to what the future is going to be like. So he's like, sometime in the future, I will be telling about this with a sigh. And it'll be like a sigh of kind of pride. It's kind of a self-satisfied sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, somewhere years later, I know I'm going to be telling this story with a contented sigh. Think maybe he's going to be telling it to his grandchildren or something. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the road less traveled by. I took the one less traveled by. And that made all the difference. And so he's like, yeah, kids, way back when, I had to pick, and I picked the one that was less traveled. And that made all the difference. I decided to go my own way, and boy, that made all the difference in my life. And so that's why I say, that sigh, you could be like, sigh of, exhaustion. But because of those last three lines and the way he describes it, it's obviously a sigh of kind of like self-satisfaction. Now, most people who read this poem, 99% of people who read this poem, latch on to those last two lines and take that as the meaning of the poem. I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So that the poem for most people is about kind of like that American ideal, so to speak. You can go your own way. You can choose your own path. In fact, it's good to choose your own path. That will make the difference in your life, right? And if you come away with that, great, depending on your perspective, good message, right? But, so that works as a takeaway from the poem. Although it is, interestingly enough, that's not necessarily a message that would resonate with cultures around the world. There are a lot of cultures in the world who are like, no, being an individual is not the main thing. You might hear my son and wife talking there in the background in another room. But a lot of cultures would be like, no, being an individual is not a good thing. Being a part of a family, being a part of a culture, looking out for each other is better than going your own way, And so the message, while being in a very Western culture takeaway, certainly there's lots of cultures that would, might argue with that perspective, of what makes for an ideal life, right? But it definitely, a lot of people take those two lines and they run with them. But I want to look back through the poem and point out that Frost is, he's going deeper with this poem. The title is not The Road Taken. The title is The Road Not Taken. And so from the beginning, he emphasizes not the road that he took and how that made all the difference. He emphasizes the road that he didn't take. The road that he also wanted to take but never got back to that option of having that road because he chose the other one, right? And so, and again, in that second stanza, he points out, he emphasizes that although initially the road he took might have looked like there were less people that took that one, in actuality, looking at that second stanza, he's like, the roads were pretty much the same. They were the same. I couldn't tell that that more people had taken one or another. And so when you come around to that fourth stanza, the final stanza, it's kind of like, you get to the end of your life and some of us, depending on your personality, some of us look back on our life with rose-colored glasses, and that's this narrator. Rob Frost is like, I know when I get to be an old man that I'll look back on this experience and I'll paint it rosy. I'll wear those rose-colored glasses, and even though now I know that pretty much they were equal, I know that in the future I'll be telling, my grandkids or whoever that I took the road less traveled, and that made the difference. And that's kind of a comment on what it's like to grow older, It's very hard not to look back on your life the older you get and look at certain events and either paint them as worse than they were or as better than they were, depending on whether you're naturally an optimist or a pessimist. You can do either one. You can tell people about how awful an experience was when in reality in the moment it wasn't that awful, or vice versa. So I think it's just a very interesting poem. Because those last two lines really, that they're what most people latch on to. Yeah, and again, from a Western culture perspective, it's a cool message. But then, as you read back over the poem again and again, you realize that Frost is going somewhere deeper with it and kind of delving into human psychology some. All right. Thanks for listening, and post your comments there. Give me your thoughts on this.